Hello there, Mad Mike here, and welcome back to the channel. And today we are going to do a review of a show that has been out for a little while. It came out last year, but Cham actually wanted me to sit down and watch it because he really enjoyed the show, and I actually did too by the end of it. Is the show HBO original Chernobyl. Now, the show does fairly accurately follow the events of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster that took place in Chernobyl in 1986. Now, when we go through the series, it's not. I mean, for the most part, it's actually fairly linear. It doesn't jump around a whole lot in terms of like this happened before, this happened after. There is a little bit of confusion when you go into the last episode, but I'll get to that. The season is only 5 episodes long. It's basically just a self-contained miniseries. I doubt there's going to be a second one. Maybe they'll do one on the Fukushima plant if they get enough information on it. But the main characters really are Jared Harris, who plays the real life. Again, almost everybody in this show existed in real life. A lot of the people that are portrayed in this were real people. So he plays Valery Lagasov, and I apologize immediately if I'm going to pronounce a lot of these Russian names wrong. I'm probably going to go more by the actors than the actual Russian names. And he's basically he's kind of the nuclear scientist that helps kind of figure stuff out. And then you also have Stellen Skarsgard, who's coming in as Boris Sherbina. Sure, I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And I actually watched the show, so I know phonetically what it sounds like. It's just reading it, it looks different. And he is basically kind of the government guy or the Soviet guy who's looming over the whole thing. You know, he works with Valery to try and solve all the issues that they're having with the plant, post explosion. And Emily Watson, who kind of just like a character that just gets kind of chucked in there. She's not. She's probably my least favorite out of the three, but I do really enjoy her as well. She's kind of a little bit of a third wheel, but without her, then you don't get more of the human aspect of the disaster. Valery and Boris really are kind of the two technical guys, if you want to put it that way. Less Boris and more Valery, but they're kind of dealing with just we need to make sure that the plant is secure, and then we need to start doing the cleanup process, and that's kind of what the early episodes are. Now I'm going to kind of go through each episode individually and kind of give you a little bit of a breakdown. This will contain spoilers. I don't understand if I'm calling it spoilers because it's an actual historical event that you can actually go look up on. And like I said, this is fairly accurate to it. There's not really a lot of deviation. But the very first episode actually begins, the second it begins is with the actual explosion at Chernobyl power plant. And then we actually see what happens to all the people that are inside the plant. And all of those employees and the guy that was running the whole thing, basically the man who was in charge, who I believe is played by Paul Ritter, Anatoly Dyatlov. Again, I'm pronouncing these as best I can. Antony Dyatlov, or Anatoly Dyatlov. He basically he was presiding over the test. He wanted it done. There was a lot of pressure from the upper, echelon of the Soviet Union in that particular province of Ukraine. That wanted the specific test done, and basically they rushed it through, and they explain that actually in the 5th episode in great detail, which I'm kind of surprised that they actually went into as much detail as they did. But when you look at that first episode, it's really centered around the plant employees and the immediate first responders to the fire, where you had the firemen. Now, you don't necessarily know the significance of some of the stuff in the trailer, really, or not in the trailer, in the first episode, really, until the second episode, because they show a bunch of stuff, like they show the horrors of radioactivity. They show like what it can legitimately do to people, and it's actually the practical effects are extremely good in the show. When they show people that have radiation sickness, they try to do it as realistically, I think, as possible. They show like what happens to people and some of the horrible, horrible shit that it winds up doing to your body and just basically breaking it down and making it decay from the inside out. It's extremely disgusting. I will say that for people that are kind of squeamish when it comes to certain types of body horror, you're probably not going to like this because they do show a good amount of it. The show is actually, even though I did think it was a very good show, it is extremely depressing, other than a few specific little moments. Because really, kind of, when the firemen, it's one of those things like it as an audience member when the firemen come to try and put out the nuclear fire at the power plant that they're probably going to die, but they have no idea. They just think they're there to put out a fire. They don't know that there's radioactivity. They don't know that there's anything else until much, much later. And we also follow the story of this one fireman who has a young wife who is, he doesn't know at this point, but she states that she's pregnant at one point a little bit later on. And basically, you follow kind of these little individual stories that are they show you a bit more of the human element, which I like because you do have to balance out the two. You have to balance out the technical with the human element. Otherwise, it's not a drama or a miniseries, and it's just a documentary. Now, I will say that the story kind of starts off. Actually, I shouldn't say it starts off immediately with the actual destruction of the power plant. The first episode actually starts off with a monologue by Jared Harris as Valeri, and it starts out 2 years later where he gives this monologue and then immediately hangs himself, and you really have no idea why. You can kind of make a couple of educated guesses at that point, but you don't really know exactly why. Now, as we progress through, again, we focus more on Valeri and Boris in the second, third, and even into the fourth episode. And basically, the whole thing with those episodes, especially the second and third one, they're trying to contain the power plant because they have a breach. And there's all these different meeting scenes they have. They have actual historical people in there, like a guy playing Mikhail Gorbachev. So, I mean, there are legitimate people that are more recognizable people that are in there that people would kind of recognize and know if they're familiar with the time period. So we go through the whole thing with the plant workers, which is horrifying, by the way, when you go through that, because that is where a lot of those really good kind of in the fourth episode too, but that's where a lot of those kind of really good gore effects sort of come into play, because the radiation just starts breaking down their bodies physically. They start like bleeding from areas that have touched very highly radioactive spots. There's a scene where actually a couple of them actually walk into the core and see the core exposed and like spewing out radiation. And basically, they even say at that point, like, those guys are dead. Those guys, they have no protection, almost no protection, except for their little radioactive suits that they wear inside of the plant, and that's about it. They don't have anything else, so they're probably going to die. Even in the moment when you're looking at that, you know that they're probably going to die. In fact, most of the people in the first episode that you see are probably going to die. For the ones that didn't, a lot of them wound up dying, a short number of years later due to various types of cancer because of the exposure to radiation. But I think the most interesting part of the story for me is really getting into the second and third episodes, because those are really where you get a lot of the scientific stuff, and the fifth episode actually too. But the second and third episodes kind of chronicle their journey to try and contain the core, and I like the performances that Jared Harris and Stellan Skarsgard give opposite each other, because they start out basically as kind of like, Stellan Skarsgard doesn't give a shit. He's like, hey, you're just some stupid egghead. I don't need to listen to you. I'm just going to do whatever the fuck I want. But they have these neat little exchanges over the course of that episode until they're to the point where they're actually trusting each other. And there's actually a very good scene on the helicopter when they first arrive at Chernobyl, where Stellan Skarsgard's character wants them to fly directly over where the cloud of radiation is erupting from the plant, and Jared Harris literally goes into the cockpit and says, if you fly over that, you're going to be wishing for the bullet he's going to give you in like 3 days, because the radiation would just destroy them. It's literally to the point where they actually show it actually later on when they do there's like a helicopter drop section where a helicopter actually does fly into the cloud and it just wipes out all their electronics, kills the helicopter crashes, and presumably everybody inside was killed. Um, so it's kind of, again, a little bit of a duality moment where Boris's character, or Stellan Skarsgård's character, Boris, kind of realized, like, oh shit, he was right. If we had done that, I would be dead right now. But the other thing is that both of them also accept at a point, because Valeri actually tells Boris this at some point, because they're in Chernobyl, because they're in such high radioactive areas, they probably will not live very long. They will probably die of cancer within the next 5 to 10 years, depending on how heavy their exposure is. So they already know after a certain point when they've been there that they're going to die. And it's it's an interesting little moment because neither one of them looks, they never, until later on, they really don't exhibit many symptoms, and even Stellan Skarsgård's character kind of laughs it off a little bit because it looks like he feels fine, he looks fine, but in reality, he's taking a lot of radiation to his body, along with Jared Harris. So it's kind of interesting to see people that they realize that they somehow something royally fucked up, and it's an interesting little mystery as you follow it down, because then you have Emily Watson's character come in. And her character is basically, she's a nuclear physicist from from Minsk. And she basically figures out on her own that the Chernobyl disaster has happened due to some radioactive sensors and stuff that they have in Minsk, because she works at a radioactive, or not a radioactive, but a nuclear physics center. So they have the equipment to be able to read radioactivity, and they're reading it from outside. So they're like, oh, okay. At first they think it's a problem and stuff like that. Again, kind of, the state kind of wants to bury it. Or at least that's how it's portrayed in this, which would not be uncommon for the Soviet Union. They do not want to let anything like that. That's a state secret. They don't want to let anything like that out. And that, again, plays into later episodes. But those first 4 episodes, except for the very beginning of the first episode, we follow this linear timeline until we get to a point where the situation has been locked down and they're starting to do the cleanup efforts. Now, I will say this: if you do not like animal violence, do not watch the 4th episode. I will say that candidly, because there are 3 parts of this the cleansing effort, basically, to try and make sure that no radioactivity, no contamination spreads out into soil or groundwater. And one of those 3 contingencies is that they have to wipe out all the local wildlife that has been exposed. Now, because most of the affected areas, like larger areas like Pripyat, a lot of people just left. They didn't take anything with them. They didn't take their animals with them because they thought they were going to be back there in a couple of days. So now they have a situation where a lot of the animals that are around that are now irradiated are pets. So they then have basically these cleanup crews that go through and have to shoot and kill the pets, unfortunately. So if you don't like that type of thing, you're probably not going to want to watch the 4th episode. And to be honest, if you watch the first half of it and you get the gist of it, you can probably go on to the 5th episode without having too many dark spots. Just throwing it out there again, because that section was even kind of difficult for me to get through, because it is pretty brutal. They do show you a good amount, not all of it. They don't show you like a lot of they don't show you the animals actually physically being shot. You just you see them shoot, and then you see the animal that's usually dead. And they have a few scenes where they're burying these large masses of dogs and cats and stuff like that, and before they wind up getting to the wildlife and the other wild animals that are around the area. But then in the 5th episode, then you get kind of the explanation, which I like. I think the 5th episode wraps everything up very well, because the 5th episode shows you what exactly happened at the plant before the explosion and what caused the explosion. And it also shows that, it wasn't just human error, although human error did play a large part in it. It was also due to a fatal flaw in the RBMK reactors that the Soviet Union was using at the time, where there was an issue with the graphite that was on the tips of the control rods that would go into the nuclear reactor to basically stop the reaction and slow it down, and therefore prevent the core from melting down. And there was a fatal flaw with that wound up getting the exact conditions it needed for the core itself to explode. And we actually see that at the end too, which I thought was a very good touch. They actually show you the physical explosion that happened inside of reactor number 4 at Chernobyl. And they show you everything that led up to it. They show you all the incompetence. They tell you exactly what the test was supposed to be and how it was supposed to be conducted and why it was dangerous and why it shouldn't be attempted. But then, and most of this is also given by Ritter's character, Jared Harris's character, and Emily Watson's character. For the most part, Stellan Skarsgård also pops in there too. But in the 5th episode, there's another thing that we see too, where Valeri, his hair is starting to fall out. We see that at one point, he pulls out a little bit of his hair simply by accident, which means that, the radiation has started to get to him, as well as Stellan Skarsgård, who appears to be coughing, who at point in the episode starts coughing up blood. And it's like, okay, he realizes that he's royally fucked right now. So they both realize they basically signed their own death warrants. And also at various points especially in the later parts of the series, we see the head of the KGB who pops up, and that's kind of like a looming little thing that's over there until the very last episode. But basically, Valeri then, after basically chastising the Soviet Union for using cheap production methods, and that being the ultimate linchpin that caused this accident to happen, in addition to the major human error, he's basically punished by the state. He's isolated. He's not allowed to speak to Stellan Skarsgård's character or Emily Watson's character again. And then we go to the time skip 2 years later when we see that he hangs himself, and we understand why at that point. The reason why he hung himself is he recorded all these memoirs at the end of his life to help to try and get the word out about these reactors, because there were other reactors in the Soviet Union that were operating with this same fatal flaw that could also have an issue where this could happen to them. The right circumstances had to occur in order for Chernobyl to happen, but that doesn't mean it couldn't happen again. And the Soviet Union could not take something like that, but at the same time, they can't acknowledge that they made a mistake. Otherwise, then you're going to have a lot of people on the outside asking questions. So they chose to ignore it initially until Valeri killed himself. And then it was made public knowledge because it had just gotten leaked out because it was such a high-profile thing, since everybody knew in the scientific and nuclear community that he had helped stop the Chernobyl disaster, and he had also had a testimony at I believe it was Geneva, that was basically talking to the world about how they handled the disaster and how everything stopped. And then at the end, the very end of the actual series, after kind of the last shot, you have this little montage of actual pictures of people that says what happened to them. They had the actual Valeri, the actual Boris, the actual Yulana Kimyov, which is Emily Watson's character. You had all of these people, in addition to a lot of the plant workers. It says, what happened to them? Did they die? Did they live? They actually have a section of this, where they have to send these 3 guys down, and they're 100% sure these 3 guys are going to die. They send these 3 guys down to basically empty these water tanks. Otherwise, when the heat gets to it, it'll immediately vaporize and explode, and it'll spread nuclear shit everywhere. So they successfully do it, but the Soviet Union originally reported that all 3 of these men died days afterwards. But the the miniseries actually states that all 3 of them are alive, or all 3 of them lived. 2 of them are still alive today. So it is extremely bizarre. It doesn't make any sense. They should definitely be dead. There's not really too much of a scientific explanation for it, other than they got very, very lucky. And then they also have the story with the fireman and the wife, and the fireman who winds up dying, and unfortunately the wife loses the baby, but they tell her that she's never going to be able to bear children. And at the end of the show, they actually say that she is currently living somewhere, and she has a son. So she was able to have a child after that. So it's they give you a little bit of a silver lining to some of the parts in it, but for the most part, it is woefully depressing. But it shouldn't be happy. It shouldn't be something happy because it's not a happy event. It's a horrible, horrible thing that happened, and it happened because people were neglectful and because people were cheap. And I think that's the moral that I think people should take from not only the actual Chernobyl disaster but the show is that you can't be cheap with things like nuclear power. You can't have incompetent people doing things when it comes to nuclear power because if you fuck up, this is what happens. And this is what happens to people that don't deserve it. This is what happens to innocent people if you fuck up. And I don't know if I can give it a in terms of a rating of like a 1 out of 10, I would probably give it a 9. And the only nitpick I have for this entire thing is that a lot of the people that are portrayed in the show who are Russian, who are portraying actual Russians, do not speak with a Russian accent. Now, I'm not saying that you have to have Russians in those roles. However, what I am saying is that I don't understand why you wouldn't get people that could pull off a good Russian accent, because most of them sound like English people. They sound like, they have English accents. They don't speak in any sort of, they speak in whatever their natural accent is, which it throws me off a little bit, because again, pretty much all of the story takes place in Soviet Russia, at least all the story we see. So, or USSR at the time, which was Ukraine. But the point is that threw me off a little bit. You do get used to it after the first episode, though. It's one of those things that you do get very, very used to. But I think that if they had gone for that little extra bit of authenticity, then maybe it would have been a little bit more. It would have seemed like, because it seemed like this happened in England. For me, for a lot of it, because of the English accents. But again, I don't think it draws away from the story. I don't think it draws away from the aesthetic. I don't think it draws away from, immersing yourself in the story to an extent. I think it's just kind of something that stuck out to me immediately, and then I just got used to it over the course of the episode. So I wouldn't say it's a very big drawback, which is why I would still rate it a 9 out of 10. But even though I gave away a good amount here of the story, I want to know what you think. If you watched Chernobyl, do you like it? Do you think that, maybe they should do a series on the Fukushima plant if that becomes maybe a thing? I'm not sure how much information has gone out about that. Or maybe, if you would be interested to see these showrunners do something else, maybe not based around a nuclear disaster, maybe a natural disaster or something like that, or anything like that. Because miniseries like this don't really come along all that often, but I do really enjoy them when they do. Because they're usually small, they're confined to 4 to 5 episodes, and they're usually very, very good. Because they're trying to portray something that actually happened, and they're also trying to portray something in the proper light. They're not trying to hammer anything into it that wasn't there to begin with. So, like I said, I really liked it. I want to know what you think. Put your thoughts in the comments below. Make sure to hit the bell for notifications, hit the like button, subscribe, and remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?